Good evening. This is November 16th, 2020, the North Andover Select Board meeting. And pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law GLC 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the North Andover Board of Selectmen will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by the members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 8 or Verizon Channel 26, or online at www.northandovercam.org. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of the proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. So let me just do a roll call for attendance, if I could.
Laura Bates here.
Billy Collegiero here.
Rosemary Smedili here.
Richard Valancourt here.
Thank you. Chris Nobley here. All right, we completed our executive session. So our first order is public comment. And again, following the procedures of the past, we check for anything that has been previously submitted or anyone for our town manager to call. So do we have any public comments tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. There is no public comments.
Okay. All right. Well, with this, with no public comments, then we will move to our public hearing on tax classification. But prior to opening the hearing, I did ask that maybe the town assessor could give us his presentation to kind of further orient and guide us, and then move into the public hearing as such. If that's all right.
Absolutely, be happy to. Well, I guess we'll roll right into it. Thank you for having me on tonight. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman and fellow select board member. This is a first for me to give a classification hearing virtually. So we'll see how it goes. So what I'll do is I'm going to present my screen for you to start with the classification hearing. And just give me a minute. I had a practice run earlier, so.
All good. Okay.
All right, you should be seeing the FY21 classification hearing presentation. So what I want to do tonight is I want to go through, keep it very simple for anybody watching this, and as well as any select board member that hasn't had the opportunity to go over this. It's a little bit confusing, so we'll keep it as simple as possible. But I want to lead up to how we got here tonight. So I'll go over the steps in setting the tax rate. And we're going through this right now, but a year ago, around this time frame, you started to talk about the budget for the next fiscal year. And that's the first step in setting the tax rate, is determine a budget that needs to be raised to run the town and all of its services. Last year, you did that, and at this point, this number here, the $80,582,310, a little bit different than the presentation you received, because the numbers are changing just slightly depending upon the governor's budget, what we receive for state aid, and what we actually have to raise for property taxes. But we've done that, and that's the first step in the process. So the budget is determined. During that time frame, as well as the rest of the year, the assessors are working on valuing every property in the town to determine the total town value. That figure is right here, the $5,431,500,140 is the total taxable value of the town. After that, the assessors tabulate those into categories, whether it be commercial, industrial, personal property, residential. We classify all those properties into those segments. And then we obtain valuation certification from the Department of Revenue. That's made through a series of steps, submitting some forms that they require us to submit to them. And just to give you a brief overview, one of the things they asked for from us is a determination of all the sales or data we use to value the properties in town. That's what's called a LA3 form. They will look at that and approve that first, and then there's a LA15 form, which is basically giving us the percentage of the sales we use to determine each class of property. Then we submit an LA4 form, which is the final values in each class of property. So they have to approve all of those before we can move forward. We've done that process. That went smoothly this year. And then we get into a point where we obtain certification of new growth. So new growth is anything that hasn't been on the tax rolls before, anything that's newly taxable this year, which could be an addition to a home, could be a new apartment building, even personal property that's bought by a business could be classified as new growth. And so we've also had to determine all of those data collection items that we collected this year, submit that to DOR for their approval, and that's been done as well. Then we present the classification options to the Board of Assessors, which I did last week. Brian Perry is on the call tonight in case there are any questions for the chairman of the Board of Assessors. Thank you, Brian, for being here. And they present a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen regarding the steps in the classification. So after that, we're here tonight to review and discuss any tax shift options with the board and the Board of Assessors. So we'll clearly go over that tonight, so you can make a conscientious decision on what you want to do for the disbursement of the levy. You'll vote on a tax shift option, and then after that, depending upon that rate that you choose and shift, then you would sign what's called an LA5 recapitulation sheet, which tells the Department of Revenue what you voted and how much excess levy capacity there might be. And those signatures will be gathered after tonight's meeting to submit to DOR. So that's how we got here tonight. And I just want to go over a couple terms because we start throwing these around thinking everybody knows them, but realistically, you know, we don't know unless you're in this business. And for the public listening tonight, it's a good idea to go over this term. One of the things we talk about is levy limit. And that's basically, the levy is the amount of taxes we can raise in a certain year. And of course, there's a limit to what we can raise each year in each municipality. How is that determined? So the first thing we do is we start with our base number, which is the previous year's tax levy limit. It's not what we actually raised, it's what we could have raised. And that's the starting basis for this year's limit. So that you can see here is the 77 million and some odd change. And then we add to that the 2.5 or proposition 2.5. Now, a lot of questions always come up with taxpayers about this. It's like my taxes went up by 2.5%, that's illegal. So what this is really what 2.5 is we can't raise more than 2.5% over last year's levy limit. It's not individual tax bills, it's the total tax levy in the town. And so you add 2.5% to that, and then the new growth. Anything that was newly taxable this year, you add to and above that 2.5%. You are then left with this subtotal of 80,370,687. After that, the only thing that can be added to the levy limit after that would be debt exclusions. Right now, there are $334,899 of debt that we paid this year for the high school project that was taken out in 2000. I talked with Melissa tonight that should be paid off in 2026. But you add that figure because debt exclusions is something that temporarily is added to the tax roll. And as soon as that project is done and paid off, that comes back off the taxes. So with that being said, this is our levy limit for fiscal year 2021, which is $80,705,586. The actual estimate we're raising is $80,582,210.
So, Mr. Mitchell, why is there a discrepancy between those two numbers? So the actual raised and the actual estimate, why is that? I don't believe I've ever seen that discrepancy before.
So a discrepancy between what we could raise and what we actually are raising?
Yes, yes.
Sure.
And the same with what we could have, the limit and what we actually raised in 76 million compared to the 77 million as well. What makes up that difference?
Right. So what we determine is what we actually need to raise budget-wise, which was determined back in January, and then you take into account estimated receipts that you might gather, like motor vehicle excise taxes, library proceeds, ticketing, other sources of income all come into figuring out what this number is, because what we're talking about is the amount we have to raise from property taxes because of all the other revenue sources we have in town. So that can certainly fluctuate between the two. It's almost impossible to raise to the exact levy limit each year, because you certainly don't want to do that, because at that point I think you're just fixing numbers to get to that. What our job to do is to estimate what we actually need to run the town, and then also estimate the receipts we're going to take in for the year to determine what we actually need to run the town. So there's the difference. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a second here too. But this is what we could do without an override or any special town election or town meeting, I should say. So that's how we get to the levy limit. And then there's another term called the levy ceiling. And the levy ceiling is the absolute most that any community can raise. And that would have to be with a 2.5 override at a special town, at a town meeting to be voted on by the taxpayers. And it's simple math. We take our valuation of our entire town, you times it by 2.5%, and that's our levy ceiling. That's the most we can raise with an approval of a 2.5 override. Or it's basically $25 per thousand is the maximum tax rate, single tax rate we can have on the community. And that comes out to the same exact number here. So that the levy limit is based on something without an override, and the levy ceiling is with getting taxpayer approval to approve an override. And then the difference you had spoke about earlier in that first slide is what we call excess levy capacity. So the amount of levy the amount of levy we can limit is this 80,705,000, but then we're only raising 80,582,310. The rest of it becomes excess levy capacity, or what we're leaving on the table for this year, and that's $123,276 in our estimation thus far. So those are three terms that we talk about, and one of the things we have to get into tonight is what you're going to do with how we raise that levy. You know, what percentage of each type of property will pay that. And so when we look at this slide here, we're talking about if everybody paid a single tax rate, which right now is estimated to be $14.84 if we were to go there, then residentially, the town is made up about 87% of that levy is raised by the residential class. About 6.88% commercial, 2.75 industrial, and 3.38 personal property. So that's the actual breakup of the town and how the levy is raised. So as you can see, 87% of the community is residential, and that's where most of the taxes are paid for. And so if we were to shift the burden off of the residential class, you can see here right now, they pay 86.99%. If you went to the actual legal limit of a 1.5 shift, which is putting 50% more on the commercial, industrial, and personal property, this is what it looks like. The residential class goes from 87% down to 80.5% is what they'll actually pay of the levy. So you can see here, this number 64 million is what they'll raise if we did a maximum shift. And the resulting tax rates would be 1373 and 2225. And then if these next few slides are just some slides to show you how the increments go as we move up. What I want you to pay attention to here is this is the shift one like we talked about. And this here is the residential rate and the commercial, industrial, personal property rate. So as you can see, as you move up and you take and put 1% more on the commercial industrial, you can see the residential goes down just less than 0.2%. So you really have to start shifting the burden a lot to the CIP class in order to make a bigger difference on the residential class. And so if you look at that, here's one, we're at a 1484, and then you go up to 10%, it's 1461 and 1632, and you can really start to see the CIP tax rate really starts to go up a lot higher and faster than the residential rate reduces. And so by the time we get to a 1.2, you can see the rate really starts to fluctuate. Then we go to 1.3, starts to get further apart as you're shifting more burden onto the commercial class. 1.4, now you've broken $20 and you've just gotten under 14 here. And then you're up at the max shift of 1373 and 2225. So those are the resulting shifts depending on what you choose tonight. And this is where historically we've been over the past 6 or 7 years. And I will go over this historical data in a second. But we like to stay around 1.3% shift, which means putting 30% more onto the commercial, industrial, personal property, reduces the residential down to 83% rather than the 87% they were at. And these are the current tax rates we're at, 1374 and 1853. If you stay with a 1.3, the residential rate would go from 1374 up to 1417. The CIP would go from 1853 up to 1929. And these are the shares that they would pay. Going over the valuation trends, this is the average single-family home in North Andover is about $560,000. The average commercial property, $656,000, and then the average industrial property is 1.7, almost 1.8 million. And you can see that the trend here with the valuations have been slightly increasing and pretty stabilized over the past 5 or 6 years or longer. We did have one little blip in here in the industrial values, and that's because of one of the large taxpayers, I think 1600 Osgood or a couple others. Very hard to determine those property values, and it can be a swing of upwards to about $10 million in those valuations. And after you receive certain income and expense data and start to nail those properties down a little bit better, you can see here the overall trend is pretty stable. And then you will get some fluctuations like that every once in a while. And 2019 was a revaluation year here in North Andover. So it was something where I think they were just using actual data more than market data that they had available to them to determine those valuations. And you can see that it's back in line over the last couple of years now and seems to have stabilized. Then we look at the historic tax rates. Not that they mean too much because like we talked about in that first slide, it is basically your tax rates are a product of your budget and the valuations in your town and what the shift is. So historically, we've been pretty steady going here. So not much to talk about there. This is the residential share that we spoke about. They typically right around 83%. I know this looks like large swings here in this graph, but when you look at the numbers, it's basically a little bit more than 82.25%. up to about 83, almost 84%. So not much of a swing, but you can see here, there was some fluctuations in where we are residentially in the share of the burden, but this 83% right here, this line is pretty much where we want to be to maintain stabilization in the community. And then on the flip side, this is the commercial, industrial, and personal property share. You can see here, we like to be at right around a 1.3. And over the last few years, you can see we almost got up to a 1.4 shift. And certainly the select board in the last couple of years has moved closer and back down to take that burden off the commercial, industrial, personal property. I think you can start to see some effects in what ends up happening to our economic development when you start putting too much of a burden on the CIP share. Staying the course, if you were to keep the shift around the same, this is the average tax bills, residentially, commercial, and industrial. Right now, the average single-family tax bill is $7,608. If you go with a 1.3 shift right here, this middle column, you can see that it does go up by about $337, and the commercial and industrial go up relatively the same, or in comparison to their value. And that seems to be the one where we can stay the course and everybody receives a similar increase in their taxes or relative to their overall tax bill, and seems to be the safest bet, especially where we're talking about COVID, the effects it might have on small commercial properties, larger industrial manufacturers having to lay off jobs because of the reduction in manufacturing, and those jobs resulting back into people having a hard time making those mortgages and rents depending upon their job status. So I think all segments of the market are affected by this, and seems to be the safest bet would be to go and keep everything relatively the same until we see what happens over the next few months or even 6 to 8 months with the market. If you did want to go outside those, these are the shifts like I spoke about before. The average residential tax rate, as you can see, if you go all the way back to a single tax rate, you can see the residential tax bill goes up by about $712, where the commercial and industrial bills drop drastically. And then on the flip side, if you go all the way up to a 1.5 and shift it to the commercial side, you can see how the residential tax bill still does go up by $90, but the commercial and industrial goes up a lot higher and a lot quicker. Is there any questions to this point?
Bill, this was tremendous. You've laid this out beautifully. A great tool for us to use, but I think also for the citizens to understand the process here. Let's move into the public hearing, and that way we can engage you a little bit more. But thank you for really getting us off on the right foot.
Sure, absolutely, my pleasure.
Actually, I agree. I've been doing this quite some time. This is one of the most comprehensive and easy to read that I think we've seen. It's nicely done. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
So I'll hear a motion to open the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I move to open a public hearing in accordance with General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 56, as amended, to determine the percentage of local tax levy which will be borne by each class of real and personal property relating to setting the FY 2021 tax rate.
Second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And a roll call vote, please.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DeColigiero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
Richard Valencourt, aye.
Chris Nobley, aye. Okay. So questions for our chief assessor or thoughts about this?
Mr. Mitchell, I'd just like to echo the chair and Selectman Smedili's comments. Very well done. Very, very well presented as well. So thank you.
Thank you, I
The
appreciate it.
The question I do have is, what was the rate? What did we set the shift last year at? Was it 1.13?
It was just below, it was 1.28 and a few extra decimal points.
Okay, yeah, I see that on the chart. I think we voted 1-3 though, so it does, it adjusts a little bit in some way.
It does
or-
adjust a little bit, you know, you voted I think you voted a residential factor of 0.95 and then whatever the resulting CIP
Got it.
shift was. And that's typically how it's done. My recommendation, actually the Board of Assessors recommendation, we held a meeting last week, would be to adopt a residential factor of 0.9551, which would then result in a 1.3 CIP shift. And they unanimously voted in favor of that, or as a recommendation to you.
Okay. So I just believe, you know, with COVID and everything, I think our businesses have been impacted, especially following the the gas explosion. So I would like to try to hold as much as possible to the current rates we have. I know it's in, you know, we're not, obviously the tax rate, the taxes are going to go up no matter what based on the evaluations of the material presented tonight, but I'd like to try to keep that to a minimal and equitable. So I would be in favor of a 1.3 shift and keeping that at, well, I should say 0.9551 shift. That would be my
And
thoughts.
Rick, Haley, I agree. Your point was well taken that businesses have been really hurt quite badly with COVID, but as a result of that, so have families. So it seems fair and reasonable that we share the burden the best that we can. That is pretty much been our philosophy and our goals over the last few years. We did need an adjustment back several years ago, and from that point forward, we've really been trying to keep it sort of an equal sharing of the burden, and it seems to be working out fairly well for us. But I agree with Selectman Valencourt and with the Board of Assessors on this. So.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank Bill for the presentation. Being my first year, it was a lot of information, but he was kind enough to go through it with me earlier. So I agree. I think that, you know, with COVID and small businesses, and if we can just sort of stay the course, and I think that that's most important, to stay stable. Two things I thought were interesting, and Melissa, you would have to put the go through the list because I don't have them all. You know, when looking at comparing, I think people tend to compare us to other communities, but it's important to look at the right communities and compare us when you're comparing taxes. So I thought that the list was interesting that Melissa had. And I think the other interesting piece is because people keep looking for the Amazon push, right? Where's where the tax dollar is coming from for Amazon. And just to reiterate that we'll see the building permits this year, right, Melissa? But we won't see the taxes for a couple more years.
Right, so I was telling Selectwoman Bates earlier today that we do anticipate that Amazon is closing this month, and we do think we'll see the building permits in fiscal year 21, but don't anticipate any new growth until at least fiscal year 23. So it's a kind of a funny gap for us with that project. And what she was referring to earlier is that we've created a new group of comps that we're using for all of our salary studies, et cetera. And, you know, it's interesting to make sure that you're comparing the same things all the time, right? You don't want to just compare what tells your best story. And so our new comp group that Dee and I have worked on is Billerica, Chelmsford, Danvers, Dracut, North Reading, Saugus, Tewksbury, Wakefield, Westford, and Wilmington. And that's based on budget size, population, tax levy, et cetera. And it's been a really good tool for us as we've been in negotiations and working with employees on other things, but also on projects like the tax rate, et cetera. So we had a conversation about that earlier today.
It was interesting. I don't think I heard you say Andover in there. So are we so much different from Andover that we're really outside of that comp group now?
We really are. Their budget is almost twice our budget. They have twice as many employees. Their population is different. It's really a different,
Commercial base.
It's different. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so
Okay.
communities are much more like us. Mr. Chair, just so you know, there is one public comment for the public hearing.
Please.
Sure, and it is in your packet, and it says, "Dear Mr. Chairman and members of the board," it's from the Merrimack Valley Chamber of Commerce. "On behalf of the Chamber of Commerce members from North Andover, please accept this letter in support of the Chamber's position that we respectfully submit that property taxes continue to remain one of the addressable costs of doing business within North Andover. The business and industrial community within North Andover continue to face increasing competition for retail and manufacturing jobs and services. The additional factor of the tragic gas disaster has impacted all types of business even more. The competition for an active downtown, manufacturing, and professional services remain ever present. As such, the reduction of property taxes serves to assist these companies to remain viable and to keep literally thousands of jobs while still paying a fair property tax. The ever-rising cost of business and industry not only affect the larger companies, but in nearly all cases, small and mid-sized manufacturing and retail companies face even greater pressure in making payrolls and paying lease mortgage obligations. The property tax cost is one more area where reduction can and will assist companies in remaining competitive and assist their continued operation during the time of a national economic slowdown. The Chamber, in recognition of these and other related factors, respectfully request that the town of North Andover reduce the business and industry tax classification rate downward from the current trend. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
I think that it's interesting, Mr. Chairman, because we have this discussion obviously every year. And last fall was the first fall that we really got to have this conversation where our budget was created following the gas disaster. Because obviously we were just a few weeks removed from the gas disaster during this discussion in 2018. I think the big difference this year is that this isn't a pandemic that just impacts commercial taxpayers. It's an environment that's impacting our residential taxpayers as well. And so I really think that it's a no-win in the sense that it's a tax increase regardless of what classification you're in. But I do think that it's really tough to argue adjusting based on the public comment we just got. But adjusting it even more towards residents. Although we did seem to get some good news where it looks like, and hopefully this is genuinely good news and not just data that's been skewed, but we did get that alert a few days ago from Patch declaring that our unemployment rate as a community had gone down, however slightly, and that we're hovering just under the 5% mark. But I mean, there are a lot of families right now that are wondering, gee, what's the new year look like for them? Because it's not only small business owners or medium sized business owners that, are being impacted. It's the people they employ. And by extension, those individuals all live somewhere, whether it's in homes that they own or whether it's in properties that they rent. So I do think that this class, this strikes a good balance and recognizes that, we do need to share the burden. It is unfortunate that, this year does represent a spike for both categories. And I would like to just echo what my colleagues said. Like, I found this explanation of how we as a board of selectmen and as a select board and we as a community approach taxes and how we come to where we're at tonight. I feel like that's a really great explanation. I find this PowerPoint, especially the fact that the public has access to it, really helpful, because I think every year there's this conversation about, well, why did so-and-so raise our taxes? Or why did so-and-so do this with our taxes? And of course, this is a result of a vote that the community collectively gets to take, and where we are all equal every spring when it comes to how our budget is built and presented. So I want to echo that. I mean, Bill, it was a fantastic presentation. I think that the average resident will find it helpful if they want to dive in and learn more.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, try to keep it simple, right?
I mean, it's not a simple issue though, and so I mean, you found a really great way to present it, and I think again, one in which the average resident who has questions about this will appreciate. That's my final thought, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other thoughts, comments, observations from the board? Just one point of clarification, if I could, in terms of when we're talking about values. You mentioned we had I'm sorry, I'm at a grasp for the word, but not a reassessment, a revaluation,
Recertification.
recertification. And
Hmm.
just, it might be helpful to just kind of help people understand that and what you're basing the value on today, just so, again, there's a full understanding of the underpinnings. Might be helpful, Bill.
Sure. The state of Massachusetts, we go through a revaluation each and every year, which means we're adjusting everyone's values every year to get as close to market value, was representative of fair cash value as we can. Every fifth year now, the Department of Revenue actually visits our office, and we go through a much more rigorous oversight by them. They refer to it as the recertification of values, because they take all of our tables, all of our land values, all of our income and expense data, literally our whole database, weed through it. We go through questions together. We go through analysis together, income and expense data, sales, everything. It's a real rigorous process, and that's something you went through in 2019 with the previous assessor. And in that process, sometimes there are certain things that are looked at more stringently, which is, I think, why we saw the hiccup in industrial property values. Is if you don't have something that represents market, and the best information you might have would be the income that you receive from other industrial properties within town. But how many other industrial properties are like 1600 Osgood Street, So that's not representative of fair market. And so we'll see some inconsistencies with that. But it takes a little bit of data analysis and some hard work to get through that. But that's the difference you see when I mention recertification versus a revaluation.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you again. Thanks for
Sure.
that clarification. If there are no other questions, I'll hear a motion to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to move to close the public hearing to determine the percentage of local tax levy, which will be borne by each class of real and personal property relative to setting the 2020 fiscal year tax rate.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Rosemary. And roll call vote, please.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DiColagero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
Dick, did we lose you? Dick, I think you're still muted.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Richard Valancourt, yes.
Thank you. And Chris Nobley. Yes. Okay. And we've closed our public hearing on that.
Mr. Chair, could I recommend that you move forward and vote on the percentage of the tax levy so that Bill and Mr. Perry and Lynn could sign off?
That I think we'd all be happy to proceed with that.
Okay. I've got a motion ready. Move that the Board of Selectmen adopt a residential factor of 0.951 for the purpose of classifying the FY 2020 North Andover property tax rates.
Thank you.
Laura Bates, second.
Any other discussion before we vote? Okay. I'll ask for roll vote, please.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DiColagero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
Richard Valancourt.
Chris Nobley, aye. So we have now set our residential factor. And again, thank you for all the hard work. And again, appreciate all the taxpayers in this town understanding our process here. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Board of Selectmen. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
We will be in touch with you over the next few days to get you to come in and sign the LA5 form because we'll need that quickly. So we'll have in touch.
So we have governmental report. So our update on COVID-19.
Yeah, it's just a quick update on COVID. Sorry, I've got, here we go. Okay, so today's numbers, we have a total case count over time of 823 cases. 70 of those are currently active. 708 are recovered and out of isolation. We still have 45 COVID-19 related deaths. Of our 70 active cases, 7 of those are from Merrimack College and are in North Andover. As you know, since our last meeting, Governor Baker did issue a new community level data map for the Commonwealth. It also introduced new metrics for municipalities. The updated metric actually adjusts for the reporting of cases based on a municipality's population. So it incorporates the cases per 100,000 residents, but also the test positivity rate when it's determining a town's color designation. So we received our first designation under this new metric. We now have the designation of yellow or lower/moderate risk in the new map. Under the yellow designation, the town had more than or equal to 10 cases per 100,000 or greater than a 5% positivity rate. So over the 2-week period leading up to Friday, that was considered for the map, North Andover had 96 cases total over that 2-week period, a 10.6 average daily incident rate per 100,000, so just right above that 10, and a positivity rate of 2.1%. More information about the metric can be found on our website. I know it is confusing and everyone's still trying to absorb it. Also, since our last meeting, Governor Baker announced some new executive orders, which went into effect on Friday, November 6th. That includes the stay-at-home advisory from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., with some exemptions for work and essential needs. An updated mask order, which requires a mask whenever anyone over 5 is in a public location, whether indoors or outdoors. An updated gathering order, which limits at-home indoor gatherings to 10 inside and 25 outside. Those gatherings must end by 9:30. Indoor recreation, entertainment, and casinos must close at 9:30. Restaurant table service must end at 9:30. And all liquor sales must end at 9:30. And so we have gotten information about these new orders on our website, as well as in our most recent updates. There'll be another update going out tomorrow where we'll share this information again so that people have it. We are asking people to please be diligent regarding their Thanksgiving gatherings and make sure that they do comply with the updated gathering order. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that, but again, another illustration how it takes a few to push it over the line either way. And that has an impact, as we were talking earlier, about business as well as families in this community. So we're doing well, but we could do better, and challenge is obviously growing across the country. So I appreciate the work you and Brian and I think Superintendent Gilligan is trying. I think, folks are really working on it here in the community. Well, we just are on this topic. Is there anything, as a board, individually, you're hearing that we could be more tuned into questions across the community that we're hearing as a board?
Who did you ask?
I think I just want to make sure that we're doing all we can in our capacities to support and, really encourage us to get through this effectively. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's move on to when we're talking about progress. We have the Master Plan Implementation Committee Progress Report, the very first one from our Master Plan Implementation Committee. And I'm pleased to say that our chair and vice chair with us tonight, Stan Limbert. And so take us through the first report here, if you would.
You're on mute, Kelly.
Floor is yours.
Oh.
We all depend on it. Fine. Dan, maybe you could just kind of give.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Hey, Kelly.
Too many headsets. Here we go. Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Yes,
Yeah. Oh, good.
yes.
All right. Thank you. So first, good evening to the town manager and members of the select board. Thank you for having us here. As Chris said, my name is Kelly Cormier, and I'm here as the chairperson of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. I'm joined by Stan Limbert, the committee vice chair, to briefly discuss the inaugural quarterly report for the newly formed Master Planning Implementation Committee, and obviously to answer any questions that you have for us. The committee has now been formed, and we have had 3 monthly meetings to date. We've primarily been focused on forming the committee, discussing committee duties, as well as ranking and setting our priorities for the 100 plus strategies that are documented in the master plan. Given the focus and importance of prioritizing those strategies in the plan, Stan is going to briefly talk about the framework that we've been putting in place to help us with that ranking and prioritizing, as well as some of the progress that we've made in that area. Stan?
Thanks, Kelly. So as you can imagine, we've had a lot of hard thinking to go through to try to make some sense to rank the 103 strategies, action items, if you will, that are in the master plan. What we've done is we've started to look at sort of the implied costs of each of the strategies. And also we've tried to assign what we think are the potential benefits of each of the strategies and use those values to try to start to rank each of the strategies. We've been doing that now for the last month, and we're to the point now where we have a lot of data, and it now bears a lot of discussion and a lot of review on our parts. And we're going to start through it on an area by area basis and discuss the data that we put together and try to come up with some ranking for each of the so-called element areas, those areas being things like housing, land use, transportation, economic development, et cetera. So that's what we're going to be working on in the next month or so, and we'll keep you posted on our progress. Of course, Chair Nobley is a member of that committee, so he'll be bringing you firsthand updates, if you will, on our progress. But we have work ahead of us, and we're looking forward to it. And part of that will be reaching out to the various town departments and other groups within the community who are going to help implement those strategies, and starting to work with each of them to try to understand how best we can set priorities and help with rankings to make it helpful and useful for each of them. So that's our plan. Back to you, Kelly.
All right. Thank you, Stan. So as we continue with this quarter, we have 4 main objectives for the next quarter. One, as Stan was mentioning, completing the prioritization of those strategies, defining the criteria, so a framework for criteria for when can we claim a strategy is complete or substantially complete, making sure that we've got those criteria defined up front. Defining a communication plan. What do we need to communicate? Who do we need to communicate it? How? All of those things that are part of sharing and informing. And then finally, just clarifying and getting really specific on the duties as they pertain to the committee, making sure that we're all very clear on what we need to do over the 20-year master plan that is in front of us. So, any questions or comments for Stan or myself about the committee?
Well, I could just add, is sitting with there that looking at a spreadsheet and trying to organize and do that in a cohesive way really, again, reinforces the scope. but it is pretty awesome what we want to do as a community and what's potentially within our grasp. And I think the idea of this prioritization is really important, because with good organization of this, I think we found that there's a possibility we can accomplish much of this. So this is really an important, I think, setting the foundation, especially kind of looking ahead, and the appeal of our community in general. So I really appreciate the work that Stan, you and Kelly, and really the whole group have done. Obviously, Andrew and Jean, and I would invite certainly any member of the community and any board member to sit in on our meetings. It's pretty interesting, the expertise and perspective, how broad it is, right?
Yeah, and if I could, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to also express my thanks and say, it's exciting to see this coming to life, the master plan. We've always said when we created it that we never wanted it to just sit on the shelf and then in 20 years we do it just because we need to redo it. But it's great to see that we're going to start seeing some pieces of it get implemented. So thank you for taking it on and kind of shepherding it through the process.
That's
Okay,
all we had.
thanks.
That's great. Well, thanks. I'll see you next month, and we'll see you in about a month or two from now for the board. Take care.
Okay.
Thank
Night
you.
now. So we did new business. We covered the tax classification, and a discussion, possible vote about our liquor license fees for 2021. So, Madam Town Manager, if you could give us a little perspective.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several of the members had reached out to me regarding a conversation about whether or not we should consider waiving or reducing our liquor license fees for this year. And I want to kind of go over what we collect and also a recommendation. So the town collects approximately $150,000 in liquor license fees each year. The revenue breakdown is $66,000 for all alcohol restaurant, $8,000 for wine and malt restaurant, $6,000 for club licenses, $24,000 from Merrimack College, and $21,000 from package stores. The remainder typically comes from one-day licenses. These were license fees that we used when we created and voted for the fiscal year 21 budget. So as you know, from our last meeting, revenues are tracking as expected for fiscal year 21, but that included these licensing fees. And we are starting to see some decreases in areas like meals tax and in weird places like passports. So for instance, typically we bring in $30,000 in passports a year, but unfortunately nobody's getting passports. And so, that's a funny place where we're starting to see kind of a revenue loss. And so in my conversations with the finance director, she basically said that any action that we took to reduce the fiscal year 21 revenue base would be very detrimental to our budget moving forward this year. So recognizing that businesses certainly have been harmed not only by COVID-19, but Columbia Gas, the recommendation that I would like to make is that rather than waive license fees or reduce license fees or delay license fees, that the best thing that we could do would be to call a meeting of the town manager's business reopening advisory committee. So if you remember, I created this committee back when we were working on getting the businesses reopened. We knew we were going to have the outdoor dining. We were trying to be creative and streamline the process for that. But it's a great group. Selectwoman Smedeli's on it. Selectman DiCollegero's on it. Joe Dietz from Joe Fish is on it. Chris Palermo, who's the president of the Merchants Association, is on it, along with other town staff. And what we would ask, or I would ask that committee to do, is to brainstorm another small business incentive program that we could fund using the Columbia Gas discretionary funding this winter. So as you know, the program we ran in the spring for the rental and mortgage assistance was really successful. And maybe we could come up with something that would be kind of at the year end when people really have things they need to renew, like their insurance or business certificates or their liquor licenses. And I think that we could take a more holistic approach that would be more thoughtful. We tried, I met with Andrew Shapiro and Jean Enright on Thursday to try to brainstorm some ideas, but I think we need to hear from the businesses where we can help the most. And so that's why I'm making this recommendation. We do have plenty of funding left in that bucket so that we could run a really great program that would help people where they need it most. So I thank you for your consideration of that idea.
Mr. Chairman, I was one of the members that had reached out to the town manager. And I had done so after some business owners had reached out to me because it in a literal sense, I mean, where, if you were to look at what was just presented as far as the liquor licenses go, obviously not all of these businesses have been impacted the same way by the phased approach to reopening our economy / closing our economy. I think I've not dove into the data to really confirm this, but I would say that most educated individuals would say that our package stores are probably doing relatively well compared to how our restaurants are performing. As initially they weren't able to sell alcohol. Our state senator actually got that passed where they could do alcohol to go, but our restaurants now have to close by 9:30, and so these businesses are being forced, or not forced, but the expectation is in order to have the license and perform that reduced responsibility, they still have to pay the full cost for those licenses. So I do appreciate, Melissa, your creativity in trying to access those funds. And I know that I like that you're going to reconvene this committee. I like and look forward to the opportunity to engage in that discussion. I just would want to emphasize that I hope the focus is on those businesses specifically, right, that are being asked to give in terms of fees to the town, revenue to the town, or provide the town with revenue. Well, their own revenue has been reduced, and their ability to access the benefits of that license are limited by things outside of our control and their control. And so this is an example where North Andover kind of gets to be a little bit lucky in retrospect when we look at having that additional pot of cash to be able to access and help our businesses while also helping our community. But I do think that that's important for this board to recognize that we do have a chunk of businesses in this town that we do ask to pay license fees in order to operate, and their ability to operate right now to their fullest can't happen in a way that's not happening necessarily at other businesses, where those businesses don't have additional fees as barrier to entry. Just throwing that out there.
I agree with Selectman DiColigiero. It's been a really tough time, and with us being in the red for a little bit, which is great news that we're not in the red, we're in the yellow. The restaurants did feel that. Mainly the sit down restaurants. I think takeout seemed to do okay, and some of our other. But it's the end of the year, beginning of the year fees that can be quite overwhelming for restaurant type businesses. The fees are substantial. I mean, it's thousands of dollars after having some difficult times, and now that there's really no outdoor dining, that they are now forced to go in shorter hours, and it's being reflected in the food portion with the restaurant tax in particular, that our numbers are down. So it's these are pretty substantial fees, and I don't know that they're even getting so much of it back in liquor sales, which can be a good and a bad thing. If you're a restaurant owner, it can be good that not everyone is, shall we say, at least outside of the home. There's a lot of depression, there's alcoholism is up, so that kinds of things. So that part is good that we're not seeing excessive amounts of alcohol, but these are tough times. And then as they go into the winter months too. So I think anything we can do, and I think the town manager's suggestions are great. And I look forward to working with the group and seeing if we can come up with something. And I think the Columbia Gas funds are, as Phil just said, we're fortunate to have them. It was a bad way to get them, but we're fortunate to have them because these businesses were also deeply impacted during the gas crisis as well. So I look forward to getting with the group and working with Phil and see if we can get something that can give them a little bit of a boost.
Excellent. No, I concur. I think it's always better to try and way to help somebody expand their business rather than just simply trying to make it cheaper to operate the business, because that pays back dividends over time, loyalty, connectivity, all that sort of thing. So if we can develop a way to help somebody expand their business, I think the payback will be much greater than what the potential impact on these fees could be. I think that's really the design of it. So again, thank you, and I'll leave it in your capable hands. All right. Next, approval of our minutes for the open session of November 2nd, 2020. Do I have any changes? Any comments to that before I hear a motion?
No changes, Mr. Chairman. Phil DiColigiero, and I motion acceptance of the November 2nd, 2020 minutes as presented.
Thank you.
Laura Bates, second.
Much appreciated. And a roll call vote, please.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DiColigiero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
And that darn mute again. Richard Valencourt, yes.
And Chris Nobley, yes, that passes 5-0. Thanks. All right. And now on to consent items. We have a request of the school department to surplus vehicles and a vote on the winter snow emergency regulation. Can we just take 1 minute and give us a little insight on both those, if you would, Town Manager?
Sure. So the school committee is asking to surplus 2 vehicles that they no longer need because they got replacement vehicles. They're both 2005 Chevy pickups, and the snow parking is the same as we did last year, which was that and it worked very well, that when it snowed, we would actually call a snow emergency. We would do a robocall, and then parking would be banned during that time only, rather than banning snow parking all year round.
Yep, that was excellent. Thank you.
Melissa, I don't recall the last time we were ever asked to surplus school department equipment.
We talked about this kind of at length. Anything that has value of $50 belongs to the town and should really be surplus before it is thrown away. So you often see us doing it with DPW vehicles. It came to our attention that the schools were getting rid of these vehicles as well, and so we decided that we'd put them on over an abundance of caution.
I mean, there's tons of technology that they use over at the school department. I mean, does that fall under this as well? I mean, I feel like this is...
If they were throwing away something or getting rid of something that has a value over $50, then yes, we definitely need to surplus it.
Through this Board of Selectmen or the Select Board.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine they often get rid of things that has a value of $50. If you think about the value of old equipment, it really usually is not have much value. But yeah, anything that the town throws away basically or is getting rid of or trading in, we're technically supposed to surplus.
Okay, but I mean, I think that we've always got that from the town side. I guess I've never really reflected before on the school department side.
I don't know if that come up before, but because these 2 vehicles are being turned in, and that has very clearly been laid out by the Inspector General that they are supposed to be surplus, and then if they have value, actually auctioned. In this case, the value I don't think is there. We want to make sure that we're doing it correctly. So.
Yeah.
It's been recent and often guidance from the IG specifically about the vehicles. So.
Right, and these vehicles were purchased in 2005, so I don't know how many vehicles the school department owns. I don't think they own that many. So this is probably what they've got for inventory. I'm assuming these are those 2 yellow pickup trucks we see
Yes.
sometimes parked around, yeah.
Yeah, they're getting 2 new ones.
Okay. I just need a motion on this, if we would, please.
Sure, I'll move we approve the 2 consent items. presented tonight.
Thank you.
Second.
Appreciate it, Phil. And a voice roll call vote.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DiColigiero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
Richard Valencourt, aye.
Chris Nobley, aye. It passes 5-0. Great. Old business. Anything on anybody's plate? If not, your town manager report, a lot of highlights tonight already.
Yeah, just a couple of the quick things. So the COVID small business grant through the state, the application actually opens tomorrow. We've been putting information on it in our biweekly news letter, but you also can find information on our website. So for people who are interested in that, I wanted to thank the town clerk and the town election workers for all their hard work at the presidential election. I was able to be there for a few hours and see firsthand what they processed through that day, and it was quite daunting. I want to thank our veterans agent, Joe LeBlanc, for the amazing virtual Veterans Day special that I enjoyed watching very much. It's been tough to bring the community together, but the departments have really been creative in trying to find ways to continue to build community during this time. So I thank them as well. We do have the Downtown Improvement Master Plan community meeting. It's a mouthful, on December 2nd at 6:30 virtually for people who are interested in coming to that. I know I will be there. They're going to be presenting findings from their first meeting, conceptual plans for the downtown improvements, and seeking additional public input. So if you want to be heard of what your vision for downtown is, this is the time. I also was able to visit the library today and see patrons with their appointments and going through the racks and all of the safeguards that they have in place there. The library is open by appointment if people are interested in going. They have kind of curbside pickup going up as well, so lots happening there. And then I know that there's been a lot in the news and people calling about Casablanca. I did speak with the ABCC today. That is an ongoing investigation that we can't really talk about right now, but the ABCC will be in touch with the Board of Selectmen and Licensing Commissioners with more information as that investigation progresses. We're also on our second round of interviews for IT director. So we're getting there slowly but surely. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Go around the horn, comments from board members?
No, other than we have Thanksgiving coming up before our next meeting. So wish everyone a happy and healthy Thanksgiving, even during all these horrible times that we've been experiencing. It's still great to have family, and it's still great to be able to thank for all that we do have. So wish everybody a happy and healthy Thanksgiving. Stay safe and make your only risk maybe eating a little bit too much turkey.
Anybody else to add?
No, just happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Stay safe. Hopefully you'll be able to spend some time with your family, even if it's virtual, but stay safe and stay happy.
There you go. Well, thank you again, everybody, tonight. Our next meeting will be Monday, March 30th, after Thanksgiving and within shooting range of year end. So take care. With that, I'll just hear a motion for adjournment, please.
I
Move
that
to
we
adjourn.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Have a second. Okay, great. And roll vote, please.
Laura Bates, aye.
Phil DiColigiero, aye.
Rosemary Smedili, aye.
Richard Valencourt, yes.
And Chris Noble, yes. Thank you. Good night. Take care, everybody.